Ta-da! You can talk because it picks up this.
Oh, it picks it up.
Until it goes to the other
Alright.
thing. Ta-da!
Now
And we're back.
on. Hello, this is George.
And Bonnie.
And this is April 2nd.
Wow. Already,
Time's flying.
already. Yes, it is.
Time's flying. And this is Adonai seconds.
Your mouth still picked up where you left off
No,
yesterday.
wait a minute, I gotta read this.
What is this?
Adonai Sanctuary of Truth Classroom. I'm not getting old.
No.
Well, you ready?
Yes, sir. Let's go.
It has been hinted that we went through 12 through 14 rather fast. If you study those, you will notice every time the Hebrews were declared sick with boils, burns, have a child, get a house, go bald, get tezarat. If any sickness, the Kohen or the priest were the ones who would help by declaring them or the dwellings clean or unclean, according to what? Adonai's law for them. It never says to go to the Kohen Gadol, which is actually the high priest, but to have a priest state either clean or unclean.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we should explain that statement a little bit. For skin, we went to chapter 13. My sweetie's going to read 13:2.
If someone develops on his skin a swelling, scab, or bright spot which could develop into the disease tezarat, he is to be brought to Aaron the Kohen or to one of his sons who are Kohens.
Yes, true. This is a little bit of review. But now my sweetie's going to read 13:13.
Hey, Ann. She said, hi, George and Bonnie.
Oh.
13:13. Then the Kohen is to examine him, and if he sees that the tezarat has covered his entire body, he is to pronounce the person with sores clean. It is all turned white, and he is clean.
How about a burn? 13:24 through 26.
Or if someone has on his skin a burn caused by fire, the inflamed flesh where it was burned has become a bright spot, reddish or white, then the Kohen is to examine it, and if he sees that the hair in the bright spot has turned white, and that it appears to be deeper than the skin around it, it's tezarat. If it has broken out in the burn, and the Kohen is to declare him unclean, it is a sore from the tezarat. But if the Kohen examines it and sees no white hair in the bright spot, and it is no more than skin deep, but looks faded, then the Kohen is to isolate him for 7 days.
The Kohen, the priest, inspects the burn to see if it is a sore that developed from the disease tezarat. Now, tezarat is some sort of skin disease. Then we have clothing. 13:50, please.
The Kohen is to examine the stain and isolate the article that has the infection for 7 days.
The Kohen examines the spots. Same thing goes for the house. In 14:39, read 14:39.
The Kohen is to come again on the 7th day and examine the house, if he sees that the infection has spread over its walls.
Now, we didn't hit all of them because there's a spot in there that says the Kohen or the priest is to take, I believe, the blood of one of the sacrifices and put it on the right ear or the right toe. And it gets down to real nitpicky of what they have to do and what Adonai told them they had to do. But our point was to hit those things, and people who were determined to be unclean, or by the Kohen doing their job to determine they were clean or unclean, for Adonai in every instance. The priest declared his people or object clean for Adonai. It wasn't a doctor. It was the Kohen. Back then. And that's how interesting it was, as far as I'm concerned. Now, I have to admit that was a quick review of what we went through. Then I got up this morning and I wrote another little paragraph here that just came from my heart. And I don't know if it's going to minister to anybody, or you're going to like it or dislike it or what, but here we go. Another observation that was our desire is that the Bible is not an old part and a new part as the worldly society has divided them. When one studies, you should see what we call a seamless continuation of Adonai's word to the human world. Otherwise, you have one book with a lot of so-called believers stating you don't have any connection to 3/4 of what the book is, and state with their earthly manipulation believe in only 1/4 of the book. We have tried to, as we hope you have, to study for the wholeness of Adonai's word, which is actually the Holy Scriptures. For instance, in the book of Acts, it points out that you do not have to be a Jew to be saved. It points that out. Yet in today's society, it seems certain people state you have to be what some call, well, you have to be a Christian to be saved. Something we stand against as well. So does the Scripture. The Hebrews are Adonai's chosen people. We haven't replaced them. We might get grafted in, but never replace them. Now, something that my sweetie's been asking me for quite some time, and she was quite adamant about this last week. Could the term, what was the term that you always said?
Why until evening?
Pardon?
Why until evening? That's
Oh,
what it says.
it always says,
Unclean
until evening you're unclean. And this came to me. Could the term clean until evening, I wrote after evening, be because that's when the true new day starts. That's when things start over. Because in the Hebrew, in their culture, it's evening and morning. That's when their day starts. So in the Scriptures, when it says you're until evening, that means you're whatever until evening when the new day starts.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what it says in Genesis too.
Mm-hmm.
On the creation. Evening
Now
and the morning were the first.
Now that little bit was just something that come off the top of my head. And as you can see, it just falls right off. Chapter 15 speaks about, that's what we're going over now. Chapter 15, or section 15 of Adonai's letter. Chapter 15 speaks about the uncleanliness of man and woman. 15 starts out about a man who has a daily or a bodily discharge, either in a bed, chair, even on a saddle, is unclean. The man and anything he touches, for example, well, my sweetie's going to read 15, 1 through 12.
Adonai said to Moses and Aaron, "Tell the people of Israel, when a man has a discharge from his body, the discharge is unclean. The discharge is unclean no matter whether it continues flowing or has stopped. It is still his uncleanness." I like that word. "Every bed which the person with the discharge lies on is unclean, and everything he sits on is unclean. Whoever touches his bed is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Whoever sits on anything a person with a discharge sat on is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Anyone who touches the body of a person with a discharge is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. If the person with the discharge spits on someone who is clean, the latter is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Any saddle that the person with the discharge rides on will be unclean. Whoever touches anything that was under him will be unclean until evening. He who carries those things is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. If the person with the discharge fails to rinse his hands in water before touching someone, that person is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. If the person with the discharge touches a clay pot, it must be broken. If he touches a wooden utensil, it must be rinsed with water. That's why I asked you, unclean until evening.
That's why she asked me, what does it mean being unclean till evening? Now think about it.
Over and over.
You're unclean till the beginning of the next day, after you clean yourself.
That's what it says.
Make sense?
Over and over and over.
Okay. They and he are unclean until evening. Wash the article and bathe themselves. They are still unclean until evening. Interesting. I wonder why he wanted me to write that.
I don't know.
15, 1 through 12 talks about everything the man touches when he's unclean. We'll read 15:8 again, please.
If a person with a discharge spits on someone who is clean, the latter is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening.
In case the man with the discharge spits on a clean person, that's interesting. Read 13 through 15 now, please.
When a person with a discharge has become free of it, he is to count 7 days for his purification. Then he is to wash his clothes and bathe his body in running water. After that, he will be clean. How far am I going? 15?
13 through 15.
On the 8th day, he is to take himself 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, come before Adonai in the entrance to the tent of meeting, and give them to the Kohen. The Kohen is to offer them, the one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering. Thus the Kohen will make atonement for him on account of his discharge before Adonai.
Bring to the Kohen, the priest, 2 doves to get atonement before Adonai.
What's this?
Again, to the Kohen.
How do you know if he's unclean? Good question.
My answer
study
comes
that, Anna.
in a little. You must have been reading and thinking, because the next part, before I finish, it's going to be kind of interesting on some of the products that, or some of the statements that I'm going to make. Anna. What was the discharge of? Interesting question. Because then you would know if they were clean or unclean, if you knew what the discharge was of. Now, some little writings in some of the Bibles that we've got, and one of them makes a totally bogus statement, but we're going to go by, my sweetie's going to read 16 through 18 for you.
If a man has a seminal emission, he is to bathe his entire body in water. He will be unclean until evening. Any clothing or leather on which there is any semen is to be washed with water. It will be unclean until evening. If a man goes to bed with a woman and has sexual relations, both are to bathe themselves in water. They will be unclean until evening.
Very few places in Scripture so far talk about a man and a woman having sexual relationships. Read 18 again, please.
If a man goes to bed with a woman and has sexual relations, both are to bathe themselves in water. They will be unclean until evening.
Now, this may upset a large number of so-called Christians, but that verse says when a man goes to bed with a woman, have a sexual encounter with one another, they both are unclean, both must bathe themselves in water and are unclean until evening. In other words, when the day starts. Think about this. Now you gotta think about this one. It says man or woman, not husband or wife. That verse is either overlooked or purposely ignored when those so-called true Christians mention or hint about a man and a woman enjoying sex. Whoa. Actually, I didn't write whoa. Right after that I wrote in big capital letters, interesting. And then I wrote, how misleading Christianity has become. Both men and women, both man and woman, are great examples of Adonai's creation. You may call them his greatest work of art. See, that 16 through 18 talks about a man and a woman who enjoy having sexual relations. That's what it says. But the where it was talked with being unclean, I'm going to talk about that. But that isn't what it talks about, being unclean. Up on the top, it doesn't. That's not what it refers to. It only refers to that 16 through 18. Now my sweetie is going to read, oh, I'm sorry, I have to state this first. We must state to the women, Adonai hasn't forgotten about you. Read 19, please.
If a woman has a discharge and the discharge from her body is blood, she will be in her state of niddah for 7 days. Whoever touches her will be unclean until evening.
During the menstrual period, the niddah is about a period of uncleanliness. That's what it states. 7 days where periods are classified by Adonai as unclean. Now, people, don't get mad at me for stating that. That's Adonai's law. And if you don't think I should talk about that stuff, that's too bad. I did. Now my sweetie's going to read 20 through 23. This is going to be kind of interesting.
Everything she lies on or sits on in her state of niddah will be unclean. Whoever touches her bed is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Whoever touches anything she sits on is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. As soon as he touches the bed or something she sat on, he will be unclean until evening.
Did you notice the sequence? If the male, it says if he is with her, he is to wash, making it more of a couple uncleanliness, not just the woman. It doesn't have to be a sexual relations. It says if he touches anything the lady with the menstrual period touches. Isn't that what you read?
Mm-hmm. Touches, yeah.
So it's not just a woman's
Sits on.
idea.
Mm-hmm.
It actually states he. So he's the one that is responsible for the uncleanliness as much as the woman. That puts the responsibility on the man as well. Now, to me, that was really interesting. Because when everybody talks about a woman in their menstrual period, it's the woman. But if you read the scriptures, it says as much about he.
Mm-hmm.
Read 24, please.
If a man goes to bed with her and her menstrual flow touches him, he will be unclean 7 days, and every bed he lies on will be unclean.
There, now it's the sexual relation part. He will be unclean for 7 days as well. Read 25 through 27, please.
If a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, not during her period, or if her discharge lasts beyond the normal end of her period, then throughout the time she is having an unclean discharge, she will be as when she is in niddah. She is unclean. 22 through 27, right?
Mm-hmm.
Every bed she lies on at any time while she is having her discharge will be for her like the bed she uses during her time of niddah, and everything she sits on will be unclean, and uncleanness like that in her time of niddah. Whoever touches those things will be unclean. He is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening.
Now, Dave asked a question. So does it say that you are husband and wife or just two single people? This works for either one. If you're husband and wife, it's your responsibility as well. But if it's two single people, don't tell the male, well, don't tell the Hebrew males back then, it's none of your business if she's unclean. You're okay. That's what Adonai is telling them. And I wrote after she read what she read. Again, states it is his responsibility as well.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't all on her. That's Adonai's law. What he puts in the scriptures. Read 28 through 30, please.
If she has become free of her discharge, she is to count 7 days after that. She will be clean. On the 8th day, she is to take for herself 2 doves or 2 young pigeons and bring them to the Kohen at the entrance to the tent of meeting. The Kohen is to offer the one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering. Thus the Kohen will make atonement for her before Adonai on account of her unclean discharge.
After 7 days, you're clean. 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, a sin offering and burnt offering. It said in 30, that way, now underline this next part, the Kohen are making an atonement for her before Adonai. Read 31, please.
In this way you will separate the people of Israel from their uncleanness, so that they will not die in a state of uncleanness for defiling my tabernacle which is there with them.
Adonai was telling the Hebrews, you are to separate Israel from their uncleanliness so they won't die in the way of being unclean. He's giving them examples and laws on how to become clean. For defiling my tabernacle. You can't do that. You got to be clean. You got to be clean, or otherwise you'd be defiling my tabernacle, is what he said. Mm-hmm. Which is among what? My people. Is that what it says?
Yeah, separate the people of Israel.
They are the laws for the Hebrews who do those things. And it's for the women who have a menstrual period. And it's for the male who is with her, whether married or not. Now, I told you earlier, when it talks about a male has a bodily discharge, that could be a sore with a pus on it. It could be blood that falls off, he hurts himself and it comes onto the place. We don't know exactly, but it doesn't say, it just says a bodily discharge either in a bed, chair, or even in a saddle. He gets a sore. And have you ever had a scab, and the scab kind of gets a little infected and passes up? That's one of the reasons, one of the things he's talking about. But that's not what a lot of the scriptures say. A lot of the scriptures says that's all semen. But that's not what it says until you get to 16 and 18. Now, preachers like to point out certain things to make that whole chapter sound like semen or the blood of a woman. But what it is actually following the laws that Adonai has given them for bodily discharge of any kind. I'm getting ready to close. We told you it was going to be short. They are the laws for the Hebrews who do those things. And the interesting part is that my sweetie asked me all week, what was until evening? Why was it until evening? And this morning, something told me to write down, that's when the new day starts. You can go back to Genesis or Bereshit or whatever you want to call it to find out. It was evening and morning the first day. Mm-hmm. That's when their day starts. Now my sweetie's going to read 32 and 33.
Such is the law for a person who has a discharge, for a man who has a seminal emission that makes him unclean, for a woman in middah during her menstrual period, for a person, man or woman, with a discharge, and for a man who has sexual relationships with a woman who is unclean.
See that don't go from there. 32 and 33 actually explains everything that I just talked about. It has two entities. Read that 32 again.
Such is the law for a person who has a discharge.
A discharge. And then it talks about
for a man who has a seminal emission that makes him unclean.
So those are two different things that preachers and priests, and I've never heard a rabbi teacher talk about this, but it's not just a sexual or a semen or blood from a lady having her menstrual period. That could be any kind of sore or anything that pertains to it. I wrote, the ending refers back to 16 through 18, and my sweetie's going to read that to end it. Read 16 through 18.
If a man has a seminal emission, he is to bathe his entire body in water. He will be unclean until evening. Any clothing or leather which there is any semen is to be washed with water. It will be unclean until evening. If a man goes to bed with a woman and has sexual relations, both are to bathe themselves in water. They will be unclean until evening.
That's more or less what we've been trying to get across for most of this talk tonight. It doesn't just talk about sex and semen and woman's menstrual period. It talks about any kind of uncleanliness, as, let's say, boils, or you have a pus that comes out from a sore, or anything else that touches a person, a man or a woman, and it makes, in Adonai's eyes, they're unclean. But preachers hit it as this only talks about sex. And that's part of it. But it doesn't, the interesting thing to me was that Adonai didn't put all the onus on the woman. It states in many places, I think we pointed them out, that if he touches her, has sexual relations with her during her period, that he is responsible for doing that too. So it puts the onus on both of them. Kind of a weird little talk tonight, but I tell you what, I've never heard preachers or anybody else explain it the way the scriptures actually talk. It doesn't talk about sex until you get to 16 through 18. And how do you know if a person is unclean? Well, if your boyfriend or husband or girlfriend or wife has a sore with a pus on it and they touch you cuddling up to you, in that writing, it would mean that somebody was unclean. It may not sound like much to anybody else, but to me, I wanted, how did I put that on that little paper that I wrote? Sing to yourself. I'll be back.
Sing to yourself.
God's sex education class.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is God's sex. George just said this is God's sex education class. See, we gotta a lot of so-called believers stating you don't have to have any connection with or to 3/4 of the book. The ones who only want to believe in what the so-called rewriters of the scriptures says, well, the New Testament, you don't have to believe anything. God's love now. Well, I'm sure Moses and all those other guys that they had war with would have loved that concept. But we've had quite a talk tonight. And I'm pretty confident that Adonai is trying to show us something. I don't know where we're going with it. But it's kind of interesting how he takes the onus off of just one or the other part of the people. It seems like the onus is as much on the man as it is the woman in most instances. More so. But hope nobody fooled you yesterday. Have a great day. Have a great week.
Thanks for being part of our talk, guys.
And thank you, Ann. You guys have a blessed week, and may Adonai watch over each one of you. God bless. Bye.